Internal program record, undated, unsigned.
Candidate Volkov. Day 15, 1432. Chamber sealed. Chamber under continuous observation. Chamber empty. At 1433, the motion sensors registered presence. At 1434, Volkov was sitting on the cot. He did not enter through the door. The door did not open. He was simply there. We reviewed the recording from all 3 camera systems. There is no moment of appearance on any of them. He is present on frame 1433-41. He is absent on frame 1433-40. Between those frames, 1/30th of a second. Between those frames, a person appeared in a sealed room.
Sensory deprivation research at the Soviet cosmonaut training facility at Star City was a standard component of psychological preparation for spaceflight. The anechoic isolation chambers, SC1 through SC4, were designed to test psychological stability under conditions of complete sensory restriction. Absolute silence, total darkness, continuous monitoring. Candidates entered for controlled periods and were assessed on their ability to maintain cognitive function without external sensory input. SC1 through SC3 produced expected data on the effects of extreme isolation. SC4 produced something different. The difference began on day 15. I found this program through a medical research registry. I was systematizing for an institutional inventory of Soviet cosmonaut psychological preparation programs. EHA C4 appeared as an anomalous entry, a standard isolation protocol classified substantially above the medical research level, with a notation I had not previously encountered attached to a medical program. Day 15 Protocol. Access restricted. Isolation protocols do not have restricted days. A specific day within a medical protocol does not carry its own access restriction unless something happens on that day that the protocol was not designed to produce. In those days, there was no way to hide your communications from the state. Every letter was opened. Every call was monitored. Even the cosmonauts' private journals were reviewed by security officers. Today, you have a choice. Nord VPN encrypts your internet traffic and keeps your identity hidden from prying eyes, whether you're researching sensitive topics or just browsing privately. If you want to protect yourself online, check the link in the pinned comment for an exclusive deal. Nothing personal. A specific day within a medical program carrying its own classification. Restricted days within medical programs are what archivists investigate. The Sensory Deprivation Research Program at SC4 was established in 1961, formally authorized as part of an expanded psychological preparation curriculum for the growing cosmonaut corps. The chamber's technical specifications were standard, anechoic construction rated to eliminate all sound above 0 decibels SPL, complete electromagnetic shielding, total light exclusion, 3 independent camera systems with overlapping fields of view, a full suite of physiological monitoring sensors transmitting continuously to an external station. The design life of an isolation sequence was 14 days. The maximum duration judged to produce useful psychological data without causing lasting harm. The Day 15 protocol was not in the original design specification. It emerged from what the chamber began producing when the first full 14-day sequence ran past its intended conclusion. What the chamber was producing was documented by Dr. Nadezhda Belova, 43 years old, chief psychologist of the SC4 program from its establishment in 1962 through its closure in 1971. She maintained 2 sets of records: the official clinical documentation that went through standard medical channels and a private monitoring journal that she filed with her personal research materials. Both ended up through a chain of archival decisions I cannot fully reconstruct in the program file that I am reading. The official documentation describes the expected progression of sensory deprivation effects. Minor perceptual distortions appearing by day 3 to 5, mild hallucinatory experiences reported by day 7 to 10, progressive difficulty with time perception and spatial orientation in the second week. This progression is consistent with the published literature. It is consistent with what SC1 through SC3 produced. It is what happened in SC4 through day 11. On day 12, the candidates began describing a room. The private journal is where Belova documented what the official clinical record could not accommodate. Her entry from March 1964, after the third candidate had undergone what the program had begun to call, in internal communications, a day 15 event.
I want to document the description convergence finding in detail before I attempt to present it in any formal context, because formal context will require me to frame it in ways that will cost it something essential, and I want the full version to exist somewhere. What I have found is this. Each of the 3 candidates who have now undergone a day 15 event produced in the 36 to 48 hours preceding the event a detailed verbal description of a room. Not the isolation chamber, a different room, a room I have been unable to locate in any building I have access to. The candidates produced these descriptions in isolation, in sequence, months apart, with no contact between them before, during, or after their isolation periods. I have spent 3 weeks comparing the 3 descriptions using every systematic method available to me for analyzing verbal accounts of physical spaces. I am going to state my conclusion precisely. The descriptions are not similar. They are not approximately consistent. They are identical. I mean this in the strict sense of the word. Every stated dimension matches across all 3 accounts to within the margin of normal verbal imprecision. Every described surface material, every described light source and its position, every described shadow pattern, every described object present in the room, all correspond across the 3 accounts with a fidelity that exceeds any conceivable coincidence and that cannot be explained by shared architectural experience or common prior exposure. These 3 candidates, in separate isolation sequences separated by months, each describe the same room to a precision that means they were describing something real. I have constructed a composite diagram from the 3 accounts. I have checked this diagram against the floor plans of every structure at Star City and at 8 adjacent facilities. The room the candidates describe does not exist in any of them. The room exists. I cannot find it. I can draw it with enough detail to navigate it. I cannot locate it on any map I have access to.
The room exists. She wrote this in 1964 with the confidence of a scientist whose methodology was sound. She knew how to compare verbal accounts. She knew the limits of coincidence and confabulation. And the 3 accounts fell outside those limits by an order of magnitude she could not accommodate within any framework she had. The room the candidates described was real. It was somewhere. 3 people who had never communicated had described it from inside a sealed isolation chamber in total darkness and silence. By 1966, 7 candidates had produced the description. Belova's composite diagram had grown substantially with each new account. She described it in her journal as, by that point, detailed enough to navigate. She could move through the described space in her imagination with the specificity of a building she had walked through herself. Dimensions to the nearest centimeter. Surface textures. The specific quality of the light. the arrangement of objects that she could not identify from the descriptions but could locate precisely in relation to each other. On day 15, the candidates disappeared. The director of the program was Colonel Arkady Tupolev, 57 years old, a career military administrator who had overseen the cosmonaut selection infrastructure since 1959. He was not a scientist. He had been selected to run the program because he could manage a classified operation within the military's administrative framework without generating unnecessary documentation or requiring explanations that the framework could not accommodate. He called Moscow on the morning of the fourth Day 15 event in February 1966, when the pattern had repeated with sufficient consistency that he could no longer classify individual events as equipment anomalies. The telephone record from February 14, 1966, is in the program file because all communications from SC4 operations were automatically logged at the facility level.
Tupolev, I am calling on the restricted line to report an operational pattern at SC4 that I can no longer characterize as equipment malfunction and need to report through this channel. Moscow, proceed. Tupolev, on the 15th day of isolation in SC4, candidates are disappearing from the chamber. I am using this word with precision. The chamber is sealed at the start of each sequence and is not opened until the candidate returns. The chamber is under continuous observation from 3 independent camera systems that have been independently verified as functioning correctly on day 15 of each isolation sequence, at a point that varies by a few hours but has never fallen outside the 15th day. The candidate ceases to be present in the chamber. The absence is not recorded. The transition occurs between camera frames. The candidate is present on one frame and absent on the next. The gap is 1/30th of a second. This has occurred 4 times, with 4 different candidates in 4 isolation sequences spanning 2 years. It is not malfunctioning equipment. Moscow, where do they go? Tupolev, we don't know the location. We know the destination exists because the candidates describe it before they go there, and the descriptions are consistent across candidates who have had no contact with each other. Belova has compared the descriptions systematically. They match. We have a diagram. Moscow, what kind of diagram? Tupolev, a floor plan. A detailed floor plan. The room the candidates described before disappearing. We know what it looks like. We know its dimensions. We can see where the light comes from. We cannot find it in any building we have been able to search. Moscow, and they come back? Tupolev, 3 of the 4 have returned. Approximately 24 hours after disappearance, the reverse transition occurs. Present on one frame, absent on the previous frame. The candidates return with no memory of the intervening period. Physiological examination on return shows no injury, no nutritional or hydration deficit consistent with 24 hours without food or water. No measurable biological time having passed. Their bodies have not experienced the 24 hours that elapsed on the clock. Moscow, the one who did not return. Tupolev, we have 2 now actually. I had not yet reported the second. I was compiling before calling. 2 candidates who underwent the day 15 event have not returned within the observation window we have maintained. We do not know if they will return eventually or if they are. If the situation is permanent. Moscow, continue the program. Continue building the diagram. weekly reports on new descriptions, and on return status of missing candidates. Casualties, equipment-related training incidents. Tupolev: understood. I want to note for this record that several candidates have said they feel they know the room before they go. Not familiar of in the way memory is familiar, expected. As though they have been oriented toward it for 2 weeks, and the orientation finally resolved into a direction. Moscow. Note it. Continue the program.
Orientation resolving into a direction. Tupolev was not a scientist, but he was a careful observer of what his program was producing, and what he was describing, orientation resolving into direction after 15 days of sensory restriction, is as precise a characterization of what the candidates reported as anything in Belova's clinical documentation. 2 weeks of absolute silence and darkness, and the candidates stopped being oriented toward the world they had entered the chamber from and started being oriented toward somewhere else. On day 15, the orientation became transit. The program continued for 5 more years. The diagram continued to be refined. The day 15 events continued. By 1971, 11 candidates had not returned. 12 had returned with memory gaps. The returned candidate's amnesia was the subject of sustained clinical assessment by Dr. Mikhail Yegorov, 50 years old, a psychiatrist from the Central Military Medical Commission who had been brought into the program in 1965 to provide clinical oversight of the returned candidate's psychological state. His initial assessment, filed after working with the first 5 returned candidates.
The returned candidates present with a consistent pattern of amnesia covering the 24-hour period of their absence from the chamber. The amnesia is complete. No candidate has recovered any content from the missing period through any method I have applied, including structured recall, free association, and hypnosis. I am characterizing this as psychogenic amnesia, an active suppression of distressing material in response to extreme psychological stress. The prognosis for eventual recovery of suppressed material is favorable, contingent on appropriate clinical support and time. I expect the memories to surface, partially or fully, within 12 to 18 months of the events.
3 years later, Yegorov revised this assessment in 1969.
I want to formally revise my 1966 characterization of the returned candidate's amnesia, because 3 years of sustained clinical observation have made the initial characterization untenable. Psychogenic amnesia has a substrate. The memories exist in encoded form, inaccessible but present, generating pressure on the cognitive system that manifests in predictable ways. Intrusive effect, somatic symptoms, behavioral patterns that reflect unprocessed material. None of the 5 candidates I have continued to observe show any of these indicators. The memories are not suppressed. They are absent. When I probe the 24-hour gap, using the most sensitive methods available to me, I find no substrate, not inaccessible encoded material, but the absence of any encoding having occurred. The gap is not a blank space in the memory. It is the absence of the medium in which memories are stored. These candidates did not experience 24 hours and then forget them. They were removed from the process by which experience is converted to memory. The 24 hours did not happen to them, while the external world proceeded for 24 hours without them. I do not have a clinical category for this. I have the observation that it is not what I said it was in 1966, and that whatever it is not reversible, because there is nothing to reverse. The absence is complete.
The absence is complete. Yegorov's revision does something unusual in clinical documentation. It replaces one framework with a different framework that offers no treatment path, no prognosis, no recovery trajectory. The first framework was wrong. The second is honest about providing nothing usable in exchange. Here's the first contradiction. The standard medical documentation for the SC4 isolation program, the documentation routed through normal medical channels, the documentation that could be reviewed by anyone with standard medical research access, describes a psychological preparation protocol producing expected sensory deprivation effects, perceptual distortions, mild hallucinations, time disorientation. The documentation is scientifically coherent, internally consistent, and describes a program that belongs in the literature of stress research. It describes SC4 as a chamber that stresses candidates and measures their responses. Useful, if demanding, science. The classified parallel documentation, filed at the higher level that brought me to this file, describes a chamber that on days 12 through 14 produces, in every candidate, an identical and detailed description of a room that cannot be located in any known building. And on day 15 produces the physical absence of that candidate from the sealed, monitored chamber for a period of 24 hours, during which the candidate's body does not biologically age and acquires no memories. Two descriptions of the same program, same chamber, same candidates, same years. One describes stress research. The other describes something for which there is no research category, no literature, no adjacent phenomenon. They are filed in separate archives at different classification levels, and I am the first person, as far as I can determine, to hold both in the same session. Here's the second contradiction. Yegorov's two assessments describe the same patients, the same sustained period, the same clinician. The 1966 assessment offers a diagnosis, a mechanism, a prognosis. The 1969 revision replaces all three with the observation that the original framework was wrong, and that the correct description of what he is seeing has no framework at all. Clinical revisions normally move toward greater specificity. Yegorov's moved in the opposite direction, from a specific category to the acknowledged absence of any applicable category. 3 years of observation made him less certain, not more. The returned candidates had resisted every attempt to place their experience in an existing clinical structure, and Yegorov documented that resistance rather than maintain a categorization that observation had falsified. Here is the third contradiction, the document that should not exist. The program's official closure order is dated August 1971. SC4 research concluded, chamber decommissioned, all files classified at the highest available tier, personnel reassigned. The closure is administrative and final. The chamber was locked. The program was over. In the medical registry that led me to this file, filed under routine facility maintenance records, is the report of a technical inspection of SC4 conducted in 1989, 18 years after closure, as part of a scheduled structural assessment of the Star City facility's legacy installations. The inspection report is standard in format and content except for a single entry flagged in red in the original document. On the interior surfaces of the chamber walls, inscriptions have been found. The inscriptions are in Russian. The content is a description of a room. I requested the photographs attached to the inspection report. They are in the program file, They show all 4 walls of SEC E4 covered in text scratched into the chamber's inner surface. Scratched, not written, with something narrow and hard, at varying heights, in layers that overlap in the way that accumulated records overlap when multiple contributors work on the same surface over time. The lighting in the photographs is uneven, and some sections are difficult to read, but the content is consistent across what is legible: dimensions, surfaces, light quality, object placement. The room. The room Belova's composite diagram depicts. Written on the walls of the sealed, decommissioned, locked chamber by hands that had been inside it after the program closed. The photographs show multiple distinct handwriting styles. I counted 11 styles that were distinct enough to identify as separate contributors. I compared each style against the handwriting samples in the candidate personnel files, the standard written records that form part of every candidate's administrative documentation. The matching process took 4 days. I identified 11 of the 11 distinct styles in the wall photographs as corresponding to personnel files, not the 12 candidates who had returned from Day 15 events, not any of the full roster of candidates who had passed through SC4 during the program's operation. The 11 candidates who had not returned, who had been listed as equipment-related training casualties, who had been administratively not recoverable and not inquired into. They were in the chamber after 1971. Their handwriting is on the walls. They described the room the diagram depicts, the room the candidates described before disappearing into it, from the inside of a sealed chamber that had been locked for up to 18 years before the inspection found what they had left. I am going to close this file. I am going to note the medical registry cross-reference as reviewed. I am going to log my access. I thought the chamber was producing a shared hallucination. Sensory deprivation research has documented convergent imagery under extreme restriction, and I considered whether the candidates' descriptions might reflect some shared internal template that isolation brings forward. I was wrong about the direction. A hallucination is produced by the mind generating content to fill absence. The candidates were describing a specific place with precision that distinguishes observation from imagination. Belova understood this by 1964. The descriptions were not produced from inside the candidates' minds. They were produced from outside the place being described. They were reports. The diagram is in the file. I have looked at it for a long time. It is a detailed architectural diagram of a room that is not in any building I can locate. It has been refined by the descriptions of at least 19 people, the 12 who returned, the 11 who did not, whose descriptions appear on the chamber walls in handwriting that matches their personnel files. 30 years of description, accumulating toward greater precision, converging on something I can see the shape of and cannot find the location of. Belova wrote in 1964, "The room exists somewhere. I cannot find it. I can draw it with enough detail to navigate it. I cannot find it either. I know what it looks like." I am closing the folder.